You may be seated. If you'll indulge me for a moment today, I'm going to ask everybody to complete this sentence. In your minds, Lord, increase my what? Not going to ask you to share, but just take 30 seconds to complete that sentence. Lord, increase my. Everybody think of something? Okay, good. So, keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But first, story time. On the first day of the first quarter of my first year as a student at Divinity School, my pastor asked me to do a graveside service, to do the interment for a man that neither of us knew, but who was the father and father-in-law of a couple who was active at our church. And this burial, this interment, was to take place at the Abraham Lincoln VA Cemetery south of Joliet, Illinois. If you're familiar with the Chicago area, you know that that is a good distance south of Chicago proper, where I lived. And I agreed to do this, but there were a couple problems. First, I had never done anything like this before, and I did not even have the little book of occasional services that we use for doing funerals or graveside services or weddings and things of that nature. So my pastor let me borrow her copy of the occasional services book. But then I did not have a clergy shirt. You know, I was just starting out and I didn't have any formal role anywhere, so I didn't have a collared shirt or anything that would make me look official. So one of my roommates lent me his short sleeve collared shirt that he had gotten when he was doing chaplaincy the previous summer. But I still then didn't have any black pants, and I felt like if I was really going to look official, I should wear black pants. It seems like something you ought to do. And so my other roommate, who's actually now Soren's godfather, he lent me his pair of black pants. Thankfully, we're pretty similar, dimensions, and so that worked pretty well. And that left only one big problem, which is that I didn't have a car. And I didn't have any way to get to the Abraham Lincoln VA Cemetery south of Joliet, Illinois. But the seminary student who was doing her field education at my church was gracious enough to lend me her car. We'd known each other for all of a month at that point, but she let me take her car down to who knows where to do this. And so after class was done that day, I kind of raced out. I grabbed my borrowed book, I threw on my borrowed shirt and pulled on my borrowed pants, and went down to my borrowed car and with my borrowed authority drove down. And this was in the days before Google Maps and smartphones or anything like that, so I did not have a totally realistic picture of how long it would take to get to the Abraham Lincoln VA Cemetery south of Joliet, Illinois. And so I was really getting anxious as the miles wore on. And I finally got there just about in time, and then I took a wrong turn. And it took me a while to find my way back to where I was supposed to go. And I finally found it, and I got out, and I was not terribly late, but I was noticeably late. And I am sure my inexperience and lack of preparation just clung to me like a wet garment as I came up, all of 25 years old at the time, having printed out worship aids for a graveside service, something I have never done again, and marching my way through the final deposition at his resting place of a child of God that I'd never met. Now, all that time I was thinking about what I didn't have and what I wasn't prepared for and what I frankly felt I had no business at all doing. But the truth was, however amateurish, however skin of our teeth it all came off, I was able to do the ministry of the church for someone who had no one else to do it for him. And I had to face the rather difficult reality that I already had enough, and I already was enough to do the task that was before me. Today's gospel has Jesus saying some frankly rather mystifying words to his disciples. They ask him fairly reasonably, "Increase our faith." And he answers them by saying, if you had even the faith of a mustard seed, if you had as much or a like faith to that, you would be able to tell this mulberry tree right here, uproot yourself, go out to the sea and be planted there, and it would obey. Now, I have known people that I would say were full of faith, people who had a lot of faith, very faithful people, and I have never seen anyone who could give a vocal command to a tree to uproot itself and be replanted somewhere else. I have never seen that happen. I don't expect ever to see that happen. And so it's a little bit of a mystifying word that Jesus says there. And then he goes on to compare the situation of the disciples as being like a bond servant or a slave who is obligated legally to provide this service for their master, and who earns or merits no special indebtedness by doing it. In other words, the servant in this scenario can never put the master in his debt or her debt. There is no reward for doing what you are obligated to do. But as time has gone on, I've started to understand these words of Jesus as words of assurance and encouragement in their way. If even this mustard seed quantity or manner of faith is enough to vocalize miracles that completely disrupt the laws of nature, then whatever tiny fraction of that you actually have is already enough to do whatever is in front of you. There is no need to dwell on, do I have enough faith? Do I need more faith? Just as there's no reason to dwell on, will I be rewarded? Will I be recognized? Will in some way, me fulfilling this task, will it reflect well on me? Don't worry, Jesus says. Don't worry about how much faith you have, and don't worry about what reward is waiting for you. You have enough. You are enough. So just do what is in front of you to do. Similarly, Paul, in his letter today to Timothy, is very possibly, however well or poorly he knows this, nearing the end of his life. His companions and co-workers have by and large abandoned him. He is imprisoned. And he is, as he says in this letter, being poured out like a libation. And he is writing to Timothy, who's he clearly sees as a kind of successor, someone who will carry on his ministry into this world that is now a full generation removed from the life and ministry of Jesus. And he speaks with this particular kind of encouragement to Timothy. Young man, I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day, recalling your tears. We don't know what these tears were for, whether they were for sorrow at parting, at being parted from one another, whether they were tears, some kind of a remorse or failure on Timothy's part. We don't know. But Paul remembers and lifts up these tears. And he says he is reminded, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that lived first in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you. This is a way of kind of bucking Timothy up, I think. Say, your grandmother had faith, and your mother had faith, and I know, Timothy, I know, in that way we might say to someone, yes, I believe this, and yes, you're going to make it true even if it ain't right now. You know what I mean? I know, I am sure, Timothy, this faith lives in you. And he tells him, God did not give us a spirit of cowardice to shrink from the tasks that are set before you, Timothy, even though I, Paul, am passing from the scene, and you will be left alone to manage all of this ministry. God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit of power and love and self-discipline. Because this calling, Timothy, did not come through your good works or mine. It was not God's recognition of our accomplishment. It came through grace. And it will only be sustained through grace. You already, Timothy, have enough. You already are enough. So it's time to act like it. Now I want to come back to that sentence I asked you to complete in your minds. Lord, increase my blank. And like I said, not going to ask anybody to share. And I want everyone, notwithstanding everything that we've heard today, I want everyone to understand that it is always good, and it is indeed always requested and invited of us to ask God for our legitimate needs. And because we are never totally clear on the difference between a need and a want, it is also never a bad thing to ask God honestly and straightforwardly for those lawful and legitimate things that we want. Lord, give me good health, at least for a while longer. Lord, I need more stability in my life. Lord, I need someone to talk to. You can ask God for anything. There is no problem too big or too small for God to hear you out on it. And that does not mean that we will get the answer that we are seeking. It does not mean that the fulfillment of our wants and needs in the time and in the manner in which we ask for them will be best for us or for the world. It does not mean any of that. But we are always invited and welcome to ask, to speak to God. But what I want us to hear today is that the faith and the hope and the love that we seek are, in the eyes of God, already enough. That you are enough and you have enough for whatever it is that you need the courage to do, for whatever step you need to take, for whatever change you need to make in your life. You are enough and you have enough. And there are things that we can only do together. There are things that we can only do that can never be fulfilled in my own life, but that can only be fulfilled in the life of the community. I can pray for better health and I can receive better health, but if our world is going to be healthier, if it is going to be more just and more peaceful, that will require us to cooperate. It will require solidarity and struggle. And we can pray and ask for all that we do not have and all that we need for those things to become real. And likewise, I can pray for my own faithfulness, and God may grant me that blessing. But for the life of the church, nothing good can come from one person's work alone. It must come from us working together. But even so, it is true that what you have, what you brought with you today, are right now is enough for the calling that God has placed on your life. What we have together as a community is enough. Not perhaps everything we seek, everything we desire, everything we wish to be, but it is enough. It's enough to hear a vision. It's enough to write it big enough for someone from the street to see. It is enough to heed that spirit of power and love and self-discipline. Because it comes from God.